Hi, my name is Dr. Georgi Sabo. I serve as the Dean of Graduate Studies at Ubiquity University. I welcome you to this 5-part webinar titled The Path to Union with the Divine Ground, the essential teaching of 4 spiritual traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Christianity, a lecture series by Dr. Anne Baring. As usual, we're going to follow the structure of previous webinars. After Anne finished her presentation, I will have a brief discussion with her. And if you'd like to share your comments and views with us, then you will need to click on the hand sign on your Zoom screen, and then our tech master, Georg, will open your audio and video settings. Before passing the word to Anne, I would like to share Aristotle's view on a quest for certainty. This is what he said. The investigation of truth is in one way hard, in another easy. An indication of this is found in the fact that no one is able to attain the truth adequately, while, on the other hand, no one fails entirely, but everyone says something true about the nature of things, and while individually they contribute little or nothing to the truth, by the union of all, a considerable amount is a must. Now, over to you, dear Anne. Let's hear about Hinduism.
Thank you. It'll take me a minute to get going, I think. Oh, no, wait a second. I have to do share. There we are. Okay. Now, greetings to everyone. And I would like to advise you, there's no need to take notes because you're going to have a text sent after this talk. And also I want to acknowledge the help I've had from Emeritus Professor Chris Beisch, because he lent me all his notes and PowerPoint things from the course of lectures that he gave to Ohio State University some years ago. And that gave me a structure which was tremendously helpful in writing these very difficult and complex talks, which I hope you'll enjoy. So, the 4 spiritual traditions I'm going to explore with you over the next 4 weeks offer 4 master stories. Each one offers a guide to the optimal living of life on this planet. Each one offers an image of the deeper ground of reality and a path to the experience of union with it. I encountered them over 50 years ago, and they set the course of my life as one of exploration and discovery, even revelation. I realize now that the great sages or shamans of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism understood millennia ago what the explorers of quantum physics are discovering now, that every aspect of life is entangled with every other aspect. We live in a universe where everything is inseparably connected to everything else, where this physical aspect of reality that we find ourselves in cannot be separated from the invisible ground of all life. The Hindu sages call this discovery Advaita, or non-duality, and had an image of it in the net of Indra. In the 5th and final webinar, I will look at whether the religious institutions that developed out of these master stories have contributed to avoiding the crisis we find ourselves in today, or whether they have contributed to creating it. These reflections will take us on to what I call the evolutionary imperative of our time, awakening to a new story that we are entering now, a story presided over by remarkable shamans, prophets, and eco-theologians. India is both wonderful and terrible. This was impressed on me during the first few hours that I became aware of it. This was in 1956. As my plane was flying from Bombay to Calcutta across the vast North Indian plain, the pilot told us to look to the left. I looked towards where I imagined the horizon would be and saw only darkness because it was still night down below us. Suddenly, far above my line of vision, so far above it that it seemed incredible, I saw the whole miraculous range of the Himalayas, touched with pink and gold in the light of the dawn sun. Shortly afterwards, we came down into the squalor of Calcutta, that pit of human suffering where thousands of people live, eat, sleep, and die on the pavements. The contrast between unimaginable beauty and grandeur and unimaginable poverty and misery made a deep impression on me, which I remember to this day. The first thing I became aware of in India was the power of nature, whether in its holy mountains, its vast rivers and forests, or the dry desert-like plains of Rajasthan. The largely uneducated people who live close to the land hold it in the highest reverence, living in awe of the incredibly high mountains and the vast length and expanse of the rivers that descend from the high Tibetan plateau. They hold their mountains and rivers and the land itself to be sacred. Thousands of Indians make pilgrimages every year to the source of these rivers and to sacred cities like Benares and to Mount Kailash, the most sacred mountain, known as Mount Meru or Mount Sumeru, which is shown here, which stands at the hub of the three most ancient civilizations, India, China, and Tibet, whose traditions remained intact for thousands of years. For both Hindus and Buddhists, Mount Kailash is the mythical center of the universe, and also the physical and metaphysical center of the world. They would consider Everest, India's most famous mountain, to be annually desecrated by the people who try to reach its summit, something that doesn't occur to those who try to conquer it. Before I go any further, is my voice clear and audible? Okay. Everywhere I looked, I found the most marvelous combination of colors, from the colors of nature herself, or the brilliant colors drawn from nature to dye the cloth and turbans that Indian people wear, lime green and fuchsia, purple, yellow, and turquoise. The experience of India is an assault on the senses and an assault on the emotions. Anything that one has previously seen or experienced fades before the immensity and variety of the impressions that crowd in upon one. The completely strange sights, the enormous number of people thronging the city streets, the incredible colors, the noises, the smells, the hustle and bustle of Indian life, and the smell of street food cooking, the white cows wandering through the streets. All these are completely new sensory experiences. Now, the Hindu temple is the heart of the community, believed to be the temporary abode of the goddesses and gods on earth, and at the same time a representation of their celestial environment. The mountain-like tower of this temple represents the mythical mountain, Mount Sumeru, where the goddesses and gods live. All over India, these extraordinary temples are found, and their ancient role is to connect the realm of man with the realm of the gods. Here, men and women may contact their gods and goddesses they worship, asking for their help in the problems of their lives. The soul of India is expressed most movingly in its marvelous sculptures which adorn every temple. This temple at Khajuraho is famous for its beautiful erotic images of men and women embracing. India is an extraordinary country, teeming with life, showing shocking contrasts of immense wealth and abysmal poverty. Despite the millions who live in the crowded cities, it is still essentially a shamanic culture, deeply in touch with the soil, the mountains, and its many goddesses and gods. The Indian people are above all intensely gifted craftsmen and craftswomen, having developed skills honed over millennia, skills that have gone into the making of innumerable artifacts, from the sculptures on the temple walls to the exquisite designs stamped onto the fabric of their saris. They are creators of wonderful music, playing and improvising for hours in the coolness of the night air on drums and sitars. All this makes India intensely alive, intensely and joyously creative. India has developed a highly effective approach to the treatment of the illnesses of the body called Ayurvedic medicine, whose roots go back millennia. They were known to be great astronomers as well as astrologers, and today there are brilliant scientists and IT technicians. Indians are a generous, welcoming people, but India also has a dark side that is increasingly in evidence today. In contrast to this sublime beauty, there is the fearful power of nature to inflict drought, earthquake, and famine, flood and disaster, and to kill millions of people in a few seconds or drown thousands in a few minutes. Life and death, beauty and terror are, I think, more closely juxtaposed in India than in any other country in the world except possibly Africa. What value is human life in relation to the immense creative and destructive power of nature? Now I want to give you an overview of the principal historic events that have affected India. First of all, we have the Indus Valley civilization, which existed from about 3,300 to 1300 BC. Then the Dravidians, who were the original people of India, were driven south by the Aryan invaders, who arrived about 2000 BC, entering from the northwest via Afghanistan. Then we had the Greeks around 3,326 BC with Alexander the Great's extraordinary, I don't know what to call it really, adventure going across as far as Afghanistan and even into India. Then we had the White Huns in 470 AD, were tribes from Central Asia, and they were terrifying and terribly destructive and murdered everybody they came across. Then we had the Mughals from 1524 AD, who came from Afghanistan, bringing Islam with them. Then we had the British for 100 years from 1858 to 1947, whose occupation began with the East India Company. And finally, we had the partition of India in 1947, when India became two nations. India became Hindu only, and West and East Pakistan became Muslim. And from 1971, East Pakistan became Bangladesh. Quite complicated. But as you can see, it's been invaded many, many times. So here we have a map of the trade routes and the Silk Road. India became the meeting place of many civilizations whose merchants, princes, and warriors traveled over the high passes from Greece, Persia, and Afghanistan, as well as along the Silk Road to China and Tibet. Think of the courage of the people who did all these things. It was just incredible what they had to survive and face in the way of frightening events, really, as well as starvation and attacks from people. Just incredible. Anyway, for thousands of years, courageous merchants have traveled across these perilous land and sea routes, connecting people, beliefs, ideas, and trading goods and foods of all kinds. Now, this is a very helpful map that I found on Google, which shows the different areas of India. The green is Pakistan and Bangladesh on the right. The red is Burma on the right. And you can see up in the far right-hand corner, Assam, which is actually part of Indian territory. Very difficult to get at because Bangladesh is in the way, so to speak. Anyway, for millennia, India has been ruled by men devoted to war and conquest and has been devastated again and again by the invader and by internal conflicts. In 1947, India was divided into two countries, India for the Hindus and Pakistan and Bangladesh for the Muslims. Pakistan and Bangladesh are colored in green, as I said before. The act of partition, which I can remember, handled with appalling lack of intelligence and insight by all parties, triggered atrocious savagery and ethnic hatred. 10 to 12 million people were displaced and up to 2 million people slaughtered, as in desperate fear and haste, Hindus and Muslims left villages and communities where they had lived peacefully together for centuries. India and Pakistan are now enemies, their governments wasting billions on nuclear weapons instead of lifting their people out of poverty, each confronting the other in Kashmir, which was a paradise when I was there and is now a partitioned hell. All this was totally unnecessary, driven by the ambitions of two politicians, Nehru and Jinnah. There's a lot of anger in my voice that you can probably pick up because I saw the results of this. Hinduism emerges gradually from very ancient times and multiple influences. First of all, there was the Indus Valley civilization, which I mentioned before, then the Aryan infiltrations from the northwest, then the Vedic period from 2000 to 500 BC, then Brahmanism from about 1000 BC, where Brahma was the supreme cosmic principle. And finally, the period of the Upanishads from 600 to about 200 BC. So this covers a vast 3,000 years virtually, 5,000 years up to our own time. Ancient Hinduism is very difficult to describe because it has no particular system, but rather consists of many philosophical ideas and spiritual practices. There is no one individual like the Buddha or Jesus, who was the founder of Hinduism. There is no single book like the Bible or the Quran, but instead a tradition of sacred writings and practices many thousands of years old. Hindus regard their religion as the oldest in the world, dating to before the Great Flood, that is to say, before 9700 BC. Now, the Indus Valley or Harappan civilization was huge, 1/3 the size of modern India. It was far larger in population and area than the contemporary civilizations of Egypt or Mesopotamia, yet very little is left of it. Its two greatest cities were Mohenjo-daro in the south and Harappa up in the north. This was a sophisticated agricultural civilization with great engineering skills, able to build a complex grid of streets laid out through large cities with running water in every home, covered sewers and deep pools for ritual bathing. The people seem to have worshipped a female deity, most probably a mother goddess, and to have had a male priesthood, as illustrated in the next two images. Hinduism evolved from a fusion of beliefs and practices of this highly developed civilization that were shamanic and animistic, and the very different practices and beliefs of the Aryan invaders of India, who arrived through the corridor of Afghanistan between 2000 and 1500 BC. They brought with them the caste system, the Indo-European Sanskrit language, a priesthood called Brahmins, and a supreme god called Brahman, who joined the many other gods and goddesses whose origins is indeterminable and whose influence continues to the present day. The Aryan invaders drove the darker-skinned Dravidians, the original inhabitants of India, further to the south, and to this day the culture of the southern regions is very different from the north. It's incredible that these have survived for 5,000 years and are very obviously carefully preserved. As this seal illustrates, the exploration of non-ordinary states of consciousness was already well established in the Indus Valley civilization by 3300 BC. As I said earlier, there is no written record of a specific founder of Hinduism, but there is a tradition of seers or rishis who have continuously transmitted sacred teachings and texts dating back thousands of years. These sacred texts were highly revered, learned by heart, and passed down orally from generation to generation through a succession of enlightened teachers who were shamanic masters of meditation, in touch with the deep ground of reality. Hinduism, in its essence, is an interpretation of life based ultimately on the perception of a reality that is revealed in deep meditative states of consciousness. Turning to the people's practice of religion, it is possible to say that the most ancient religion in India is the worship of the Divine Mother, the Shakti, or the feminine principle of the universe. She is reflected in this image of Kali, the great goddess of creation and destruction, who was originally named Aditi in Vedic times. She may have had her origin long before the Mohenjo-daro civilization and is still worshipped in India today under different names. A verse in a poem called the Devi Mahatmya sums up her importance. By you, this universe is born. By you, this world is created. By you, it is protected, O Devi. By you, in the end, it is consumed. You who are eternally the form of the entire world. Now, the bewildering number of goddesses and gods of Hinduism have evolved out of a blend of original deities from the pre-Vedic era and the deities that the Aryan people brought with them that became established in India. Some had an animal associated with them, as Ganesh with the elephant, and the lion or tiger with the goddess Durga, shown here defeating the buffalo demon. Can you see the lion on the left with the goddess on his back? And that's the buffalo demon on the right. All this gave rise to an immensely rich mythological tradition. Ganesh, the elephant god, son of Shiva and Parvati, is the most popular god, invoked before undertaking any major endeavor to remove any obstacles and ensure success. But these are all part of a vast pantheon of goddesses and gods. Each family seems to have its favorite god or goddess, with a shrine set aside for their worship, a custom which is passed on to the next generation. There are many joyous festivals in Italy dedicated to these goddesses and gods, who were worshipped in the temples and shrines in every town and village throughout India. Brahman, the supreme god of the Aryans, was at a later time believed to manifest through a trinity of gods called the Trimurti, all of whom were male. This trinity consisted of Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer, who are the three fundamental gods of Hinduism. But they each have their feminine counterparts or goddess consorts. Sarasvati, the consort of Brahma, Lakshmi, the consort of Vishnu, and Parvati, the consort of Shiva. In this image, Brahma is in the center, Vishnu is on the left, and Shiva on the right. We're having a terrific rainstorm here with hail and thunder. I hope it doesn't affect the computer. In this image, Brahma is in the center, Vishnu is on the left, and Shiva on the right. These different gods or aspects of the supreme god still have many millions of devotees in India. Vishnu as preserver is understandably the most popular of the triple deity, being concerned with the here and now of earthly life. And Vishnu's consort, Lakshmi, is the most popular goddess, since she is closest to humanity and the earth realm, and said to bestow wealth, prosperity, and good fortune that is essential for a happy and fulfilling life. Now, this is one of the most beautiful statues of Shiva Nataraja, is what his full title is. The most famous of these three gods is Shiva, shown here in this marvelous sculpture as the cosmic dancer, surrounded by an aureole of flames, dancing his ecstatic dance of creation and destruction, and treading the demon ignorance under his left foot. He encompasses all dualities, Shiva and Shakti, male and female. Here are the words of a seer who lived in the 5th century BC and who had known the shamanic experience of divine unity or cosmic consciousness. This is what he said. I am neither the mind, the intellect, nor the whispering voice within, neither the eyes, the ears, the nose, nor the mouth. I am not water, fire, earth, nor ether. I am consciousness and bliss. I am Shiva. I am Shiva. One of the first things I became aware of in India is the profound difference that exists between Western and Eastern cultures. Western culture is a daytime culture, focused on physical reality and how we interpret it with our mind and through our scientific exploration. We are not fundamentally interested in the psyche or soul and in non-ordinary states of consciousness. We are most at home in the sunlit daytime world that science is brilliantly exploring. We have tended to ignore the nighttime world of the soul, even though it is present within us all the time, just as the stars are present even when they are hidden by the brightness of the sun. In contrast to the daytime culture of the West, India is essentially a shamanic nighttime culture, exploring non-ordinary states of consciousness, accessed through contemplation and meditation. Over many thousands of years, its great seers or shamans have mapped the inner landscape of the soul, and through meditation have gained access to deeper dimensions of reality. They have answered the questions, who am I and why am I here? Questions that call to us from the deep roots of our being. I emphasize the word shamanic because this has always been the characteristic of the experience of the great Indian teachers or rishis who have been able to go beyond the ordinary ego mind. I love this picture of the night sky with the darkness of the mountains. Now, there are two great Indian epics. One is called the Mahabharata, or Mahabharata, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, and the Ramayana. The Mahabharata is a heroic epic, rather like the Iliad, which tells the story of a great war between two groups of cousins, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, who, on the field of Kurukshetra, battle for the throne of Hastinapura. The Bhagavad Gita is part of this great epic, although it appears to have been added much later. The original battle the epic describes is thought to date to around 3100 BC, and the written text is thought to date to around 400 BC. The great difference between those dates. The Ramayana tells the story of the legendary Prince Rama's quest to rescue his beloved wife Sita from the clutches of Ravana, the demon ruler of Lanka, Sri Lanka, who has 10 heads and 10 sets of arms. Rama defeats him with the help of an army of monkeys and bears. And both epics have inspired wonderful stories, paintings, and films. They have nourished the Indian imagination for centuries and millennia, really. Now I come to the caste system, which is extremely difficult to explain. It's a system of hierarchical social stratification which was brought to India by the Aryans from around 2000 BC. It is still deeply embedded in Hindu society. There are innumerable divisions and subdivisions in the caste system today, and to move from one caste to another is almost impossible, and people have been killed for trying to do so. Shocking, but true. India is still a rigidly patriarchal society. Women are not considered to be the equal of men. Please remember this, as it is very important. First of all, we have the Brahmins, the priestly class, who are mainly involved in science, business, and government. Then the warrior class, the Kshatriyas. Then the trade and merchant class, called the Vaishyas. Then the lowest of the four ancient social classes, or the Shudras. And finally, the Dalits, or untouchables, who are virtually a slave class performing menial tasks that other castes won't touch. And this has been so for millennia. They are treated with contempt and cruelty, and any attempt to move into the higher social classes is blocked very vigorously and often cruelly. India is a country that has had a few great rulers like Ashoka in the 3rd century BC, who governed a vast empire and converted to Buddhism when he saw the horrific slaughter of one of his great battles. Another was Akbar, the great Mughal ruler in the 16th century, who welcomed representatives of all religious traditions to his discussions on philosophy. Generally speaking, India has not been well served by its rulers. They have not helped to lift the people out of poverty, as the rulers of China have. They have not challenged the cruelties of the caste system. Indians have a tendency blindly to hero worship their political leaders, as well as their gurus, which encourages inflation in both cases. Corruption is rife at every level. Education is still very poor. It is still a rigidly patriarchal society, ranked the worst country in the world for the rape and murder of women, which for the most part go unpunished. It is also ranked for the worst country for human trafficking, for domestic work, forced labor, forced marriage, and sexual slavery. There's a note on this at the end. Women are the main victims of the utter failure of their government and police to protect them by law. Indian women have suffered for millennia from being regarded as of less worth than men, and this belief is deeply embedded in the patriarchal caste system, as well as in current social customs. The highest number of suicides occurs among housewives. So that's a very detailed, really, criticism of Indian society. Yet, for millennia, the essential preoccupation of India's finest minds has been the search for wisdom rather than power, for relationship with the divine ground. This, I think, is its main attraction to people who go there in search of the wisdom and understanding that is so hard to find in the West. For at least 10,000 years, its great sages have taught that there is a way to understand the extraordinary mystery of life, a way to understand the causes of sorrow and suffering, and a way to free ourselves from ignorance and the habits of thought and behavior that entangled one in suffering. From Vedic times, the great spiritual teachers of India were called rishis. They were the sages, seers, or shamans who were recognized as masters of meditation and the path to the experience of enlightenment or moksha. They taught their followers to look inward to the source of consciousness as the invisible ground of the world that we perceive with our senses. In recent decades, there have been rishis or gurus who have betrayed their calling and fallen prey to greed and sexual exploitation. An ashram is a place where people go on spiritual retreats to learn from a rishi or guru. The Sanskrit root of ashram is shrama, giving the meaning of making an effort towards liberation. There are ashrams all over India, and one of the best known is the Sri Aurobindo ashram at Pondicherry in the south of India. Father Bede Griffiths, one of the great sages of the last century, spent many years in the Satchidananda ashram, also known as Shanti Vanam, which is Tamil for Forest of Peace, in Tamil Nadu in South India. The biologist Rupert Sheldrake spent time there with him, as did Andrew Harvey. Now, this masterpiece of spiritual literature, called An Autobiography of a Yogi, I would recommend to all of you. It's by Paramhamsa Yogananda, and it's the best description of the path to union by a great modern teacher, or fairly recently modern, of the last century. And Jim Garrison gave 2 brilliant webinars on this book in his series, The Great Books, last year, which if you can listen to, I think you would learn a great deal from them. They were absolutely fascinating. Now, this is a portrait of Sri Ramana, who was a great rishi of the last century, who lived in southern India at a place called Tiruvannamalai. He taught that your own self-realization is the greatest service you can render the world, because all of us are connected. If one person manages to reach the state of enlightenment that he did, it affects the whole population of the world, really. Fascinating idea. I went there after he died, shortly after he died, and stayed there for a couple of months. In other words, to realize the divinity at the core of our being helps the whole of humanity. And this realization begins by asking ourselves the question, who am I? And finding the answer to it. So now we come to Hindu cosmology, or its vision of creation. They said that all life derives from a primal one called Brahman. There is no duality. Creation emanates organically from the inside out. It is cyclical and renews itself over enormous cycles of time called kalpas and mahakalpas. All creation is the expression of Brahman's creativity, his divine play, or lila. Creation and the unfolding process of evolution are seen as a divine and intelligent unfolding of Brahman's intention. The universe is a vast living organism. It is the body of Brahman and is sacred. So the earth and all life forms on it are sacred because they're part of the body of Brahman. So all matter is a manifestation of spirit. There is no duality. This is the most important idea in Hindu cosmology. Good, turn that off. Can't talk now. Sorry about that. I thought I'd switched it off. The word yuga in Hinduism means an epoch or era within a four-age cycle lasting many thousands of years. There are four yugas in one cycle: Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. And we are now apparently reaching the end of Kali Yuga, the most violent of the four yugas. There are three basic concepts in Hinduism. The first is reincarnation. We do not only have one life, as in the beliefs of the West, whether Christian or secular. We have an infinite vista of lives, and the purpose of these many lives is to evolve from an unconscious state to a fully conscious one, or a state of enlightenment or union with Brahman, the divine ground. Secondly, there's the concept of karma. Karma is closely associated with the idea of reincarnation and the idea of a moral universe. The essential idea is that your actions have effects. If you do harm in one life, you make reparation for it in future lives. If you do good, you reap the effects of your actions. But the problem with the belief in karma is that when combined with the rigid caste system, it leads people to treat those in the lower castes with contempt and even cruelty, believing that their actions in past lives have led to their situation in this one. There is a lack of compassion in this attitude, which has huge and tragic social repercussions. This is very important. Anybody who's been to India will know this. And thirdly, we have enlightenment or moksha, which is the experience of seeing truly into the nature of reality. It's the experience of cosmic consciousness. Now I'm coming to the concept of Maya, which is quite complex, difficult to understand, because illusion is the word that's generally used to translate the word Maya. But this doesn't really cover its meaning. It's more that we are deceived by the physical appearance of the world and take that to be all there is in the way of reality. So we appear to die. We appear to be just physical beings. We appear to begin our lives when we are born. But all these are really illusions or illusory. We need to penetrate beneath the veil of illusions to know the truth and to become aware of the existence of a far greater reality. Suffering arises from ignorance of who we are and what we are part of, and from living life purely through the survival instincts of the ego. And this state is what is called samsara. Samsara is also used in connection with the many, many lives that we have, the cycle of lives. So I hope I've explained that clearly. Now, I thought I'd just put this in here, which is about the hidden contradictions in Hinduism, because despite the fact of everything being one, so to speak, everything being the life of Brahman, we have the very deeply enrooted idea that matter is inferior to spirit. Secondly, we have the concept of Maya and the idea that the world of physical reality is an illusion. We should seek release from bondage to earth in the experience of moksha or enlightenment. Thirdly, we have the tendency to asceticism and the idea that the body is inferior to spirit. You neglect or deny the body in order to be more spiritual. In other words, the body is not really part of the spirituality of the totality, which is interesting. The spiritual path then becomes world renouncing and not world embracing or celebrating, because the physical world is of no value, spiritually speaking. Women are inferior to men because they are closer to nature and share nature's inferior status. So of all the different approaches to spirituality in India, only Tantra fully integrates women, the body, and nature with spirit. So that's a very important point that I wanted to make. Now, the essential teaching of Hinduism is that we have two natures, a human nature and a divine one, a mortal one and an immortal one. The teaching of India's greatest seers or shamans was to help us to become aware of the divinity dwelling unrecognized within us, and the fact that we are dwelling within a divinity as well, that they themselves had experienced. This was a huge evolutionary advance for our whole species, when you think of how long ago it took and how still we're not really aware of it. So we haven't taken advantage of this huge evolutionary advance. Now we come to the concept of the Atman. Atman is the name they gave to the indwelling divine self in every individual. They saw that everything that exists, whether manifest or unmanifest, is Brahman, the supreme deity. They saw that the divine essence of every individual is Brahman, and that Atman, the indwelling divine self, is Brahman. So one of the Upanishads said this beautiful line, all this universe is in truth Brahman. He is the beginning and the end and the life of all. And here's another beautiful quotation. Always dwelling within all beings is the Atman, the Purusha, the self, a little flame in the heart. Let one with steadiness withdraw him from the body, even as an inner stem is withdrawn from its sheath. Know this pure, immortal light. Know in truth this pure, immortal light. All the sacred literature of India, from the Vedas through the Upanishads to the treatises on yoga and the Buddhist sutras, teaches the method of inner growth which leads to the experience of enlightenment or union with the divine ground. The lotus is the symbol of this process of growth from unseen depths to ultimate flowering. I've put lotuses everywhere in my talks because I just love them. And they're so beautiful, but this illustrates so beautifully coming up from the muddy depths into the flowering above the water. Now, Hinduism sees 5 states of consciousness. First of all, the state that we're familiar with, that is usually controlled by the ego. Secondly, dreaming. Thirdly, deep dreamless sleep. Fourthly, the I am awareness that can come within deep dreamless sleep. And finally, union with the divine ground from which all arises. I'm not going to go into these, I'm just telling them so you can reflect upon them later, because there's quite a lot to get through and I can't spend too much time on each thing. So yoga, the science of yoga, or the path of reunion with the source, was divided into 6 different kinds or types. So we have Hatha yoga, the way of harmonizing the body. Bhakti yoga, the way of loving service. Raja Yoga, the way of purifying the mind. Jnana Yoga, the way of intuitive realization or insight. Karma Yoga, the way of action. And Dhyana Yoga, the way of meditation. And each of these different ways is suited to different types of people at different stages of their life. They don't have to do all of them. Each person doesn't have to go through all of them. Each person will be drawn to one particular path and can follow that for many years and then perhaps move to another one. And this is a simplification of these paths to union. So there's the path of liberating knowledge. I don't know how to pronounce this, Jnana Yoga. The path of action and service, Karma Yoga. The path of devotion, Bhakti Yoga. In Bhakti Yoga, think of all the people who are caring for others all over the world. First of all, parents caring for their children, but then all of the carers caring for the sick and the ill in hospitals and in homes. That's Bhakti Yoga. Then we come to the 7 chakras, and I ask permission to use this beautiful illustration from a place called Arhanta Yoga, which is marked down at the bottom. Here again, I'm going to start at the bottom. The Muladhara chakra is the chakra that controls sensory perception, grounded in visible reality. Then Svadhisthana chakra, which is so located in the abdomen, is to do with the instincts, is really the hara center. Thirdly, the Manipura chakra in the solar plexus, which is focused on the emotions. Anahata chakra, the heart chakra, which has to do with deep feeling, intuition, which is actually the one which we need to develop now as a species. Visuddha chakra at the throat, which is the ability to speak truth. And finally, the Ajna chakra, the third eye, penetrating insight. And lastly, the Sahasrara, I can't pronounce it, Sahasrara chakra, the crown chakra, the 1,000-petaled lotus at the top of the head, which indicates awakened consciousness or union with the divine ground. Now, the caduceus is an ancient symbol of the 3 channels of energy within our subtle body. All ancient shamanic cultures have known about these channels and about the inner meaning of the caduceus. The illustration at the lower left is from the Sumerian cup of Lagash and dates to 2000 BC. The large illustration on the right is from a book on alchemy. It shows the red masculine channel associated with the solar energy and the white feminine channel associated with the lunar energy merging together as they reach the crown. And this process is known as the raising of the goddess Kundalini from the lowest chakra to the highest. Some people experience this very suddenly and unexpectedly. Other people may work all their lives to experience it and never manage it. It just depends on really fate, I think, to have this experience. Now, this is a quotation from Ravi Ravindra, who wrote a wonderful book called Science and the Sacred. And he says, the oneness or unity of all that exists is the one central insight into truth to which all Indian wisdom points. This insight is not alien to other cultures, but in India, all the great 8 sages again and again return to it. Although the truth is easily stated as all is one, the sages have also said that the realization of this truth in the core of one's being can take many lifetimes. And the realization of this truth is held to be the purpose of human existence. All art, philosophy, and science, if they are true, reflect this vision and further its realization. Now we will look at some of the sacred texts of Hinduism. The complex cosmology of Hinduism is deeply rooted in the texts of the Vedas and the Upanishads. These texts are not considered to be revelations from a god, so much as expressions of insights derived from meditation. They are the fruit of a developing and deepening relationship between our human consciousness and the divine ground, that the Hindus have called Brahman for 1500 years, since the time of the Aryan invasions. So there are 4 Vedic texts: the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, the Yajur Veda, and the Atharva Veda. The earliest of the Vedic texts date to around 2000 to 1500 BC, although the oral tradition was much older. In his introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, Juan Mascaro says that in the Vedas we have the dawn of spiritual vision and also the dawn of human thought. The Vedic period defined 3 stages to the ultimate realization. First of all, faith. Secondly, understanding or insight. And thirdly, the experience of ultimate reality or Brahman. The Vedic texts reveal the quintessence of shamanic experience of cosmic consciousness. And this is what one of them said: "We have drunk the Soma. We have become immortal. We have entered into light. We have seen the gods." Soma juice was first used in ancient Persia, thought to be derived from the fermented milky sap of Asclepias acida, a climbing plant which thrives in mountain areas, and it was introduced into India through the Aryan invaders. They brought it with them, but evidently it gave them this extraordinary experience of cosmic consciousness when they knew themselves to be immortal and they knew themselves to be within the light and to see the gods. Must have been extraordinary. Now I've brought you this beautiful Vedic song of creation. This is only a tiny part of it, but it's beautiful words. "There was neither death nor immortality then. There were no signs of night or day. The One was breathing by its own power in infinite peace. Only the One was. There was nothing beyond. Darkness was hidden in darkness. The all was fluid and formless. Therein, in the void, by the fire of fervor, arose the One. And in the One arose love, love, the first seed of the soul. The truth of this the sages found in their hearts. Seeking in their hearts with wisdom, the sages found that bond of union between being and non-being." It is not exactly clear where the Vedas merge into the Upanishads, but sometime near the year 900 BC, certain individuals became discontented with the rule of the priestly aristocracy or Brahmin priesthood and the ritual sacrifices that they demanded from the people. They began to withdraw into the solitude of the forests, where they devoted themselves to meditation and contemplation. Inner knowledge started to replace ritual knowledge. Around 700 BC, a few began to write down in prose and later in poetry their experiences of breakthrough to a universal cosmic consciousness. Some of the Upanishads cover 100 pages, some range from 3 to 30 pages. One consists only of a few verses. But all significant Hindu thought, including Buddhism that we will explore next week, is rooted in the Upanishads. The word Upanishads means to sit down near. The best known texts are the later Upanishads, dating from about 400 to 300 BC. And the Bhagavad Gita, which during this period seems to have been added into the much earlier Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. In the Upanishads, we have the full splendor of the revelation of an inner vision to a relatively small number of initiates whose names are unknown. We find the search for and discovery of the inner true nature of man. The essential focus of the Upanishadic sages was to explore the relationship between man and the universe. The subtlety of insight and the sublime beauty of these writings is incomparable. In the Upanishads, it is as if we are listening to the universe, becoming conscious of itself through the soul of the writer. Listen to the divine immanence of the words that follow. Glory be to that God who is in the fire, who is in the waters, who is in the plants and trees, who is in all things in this vast creation. Unto that Spirit be glory and glory. As I said, the Atman is the universal indwelling self, the divine core or divine spirit within each human being. The Atman within us is essentially identical with Brahman, the universal and eternal divine ground of reality. Enlightenment or moksha is the experience of union with Brahman. And the task of the individual is to transcend the survival instincts and the Maya-creating activity of the ego in order to experience this union and to live in awareness of this union. As the Chandogya Upanishads proclaims, this is myself within my heart, greater than the earth, greater than the sky, greater than all worlds. This is Brahman. There is no duality in these marvelous creations of the Indian soul. The macrocosmic Brahman and the microcosmic Atman are one and the same. Our separation from Brahman is an illusion, as is the idea that we need to be liberated from the control of the ego, which idea itself is a construction of the ego. It arises from the illusory nature of the ego's perception of reality. In other words, we're in Brahman all the time. We're in the divine all the time, the divine ground, but we don't realize it because of the obstruction or the constructions of the ego. Yet we are one with it all the time. Difficult concept to grasp. This well-known quote from the Bhagavad Gita is this one: "The mind is restless, turbulent, strong, and unyielding, as difficult to subdue as the wind." Our task as humans is to realize this and to penetrate the veil which hides the revelation that we are, in our essence, immortal and divine beings. When a man knows God, he is free, his sorrows have an end, and birth and death are no more. When in inner union he is beyond the world of the body, then the third world, the world of the spirit, is found, where the power of the all is, and man has all, for he is one with the one. And then he saw that Brahman was joy, for from joy all beings have come. By joy they all live, and into joy they all return. Where there is creation, there is progress. Where there is no creation, there is no progress. Know the nature of creation. Where there is joy, there is creation. Where there is no joy, there is no creation. Know the nature of joy. Where there is the infinite, there is joy. There is no joy in the finite. He comes to the thought of those who know him beyond thought, not to those who imagine he can be attained by thought. He is unknown to the learned and known to the simple. He is seen in nature in the wonder of a flash of lightning. He comes to the soul in the wonder of a flash of vision. There's a marvelous and very long Upanishad which gives honey as a metaphor to describe how all the elements of creation are contained within and sustained by the divine ground. So one of the lines says, "This self is the honey of all beings, and all beings are the honey of this self." Now I come to the Bhagavad Gita. It's the most complete manual of the path to union. and the best commentaries on it are by Yuan Mascaro and Ravi Ravindra. Although it is included in the much earlier epic of the Mahabharata, the date it was written down is thought to be between 400 and 200 BC, during the period of the Upanishads, and its author is unknown. The fact that we have two natures, a human and a divine, a mortal and an immortal, is wonderfully illustrated in the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna, the incarnation of the highest divinity, instructs Arjuna, the perplexed warrior prince, how to respond to the impending battle on the field of Kurukshetra, which is in fact the battlefield of his inner life. Desire and fear have to be faced and overcome. Little by little, he initiates Arjuna into the nature of reality and his own immortal nature. He tells him how to come to the realization of his own divine essence and act in such a way as to reflect that essence in his thoughts and his actions, how ultimately to attain the realization of his immortal divine being. Thine own consciousness, shining, void, and inseparable from the great body of radiance, hath no birth or death, and is the immutable light. Then Krishna says, I am the one source of all. The evolution of all comes from me. I am beginningless, unborn, the Lord of the worlds. I am the soul which dwells in the heart of all things. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all that lives. I am the seed of all things that are, and no being that moves or moves not can ever be without me. See now the whole universe with all things that move and move not, and whatever thy soul may yearn to see it all as one in me. He who sees that the Lord of all is ever the same in all that is, immortal in the field of mortality, he sees the truth. And when a man sees that the God in himself is the same God in all that is, he hurts not himself by hurting others. Then he goes indeed to the highest path. Only through constant love can I be known and seen as I really am and entered into. Fix your mind on me. Give your heart's love to me. Consecrate all your actions to my service. Hold your own self as nothing before me, and to me you will come. Truly I promise, for you are dear to me. So that's the end of this extraordinary adventure into Hinduism. I hope that it's interested you and that you will take it further in a bit of time. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, dear Anne, for this wonderful presentation. I could listen to you for another few hours, and you masterfully summarized Hinduism and its history. That must have been really a challenge to put so much information into just over an hour.
It was.
And it was so soothing to listen to the quotations from the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. It's just really wonderful. Thank you so much. I learned a hell of a lot from it. I only have one question, if I may, so that we could leave some time to our audience. Let me get my notes. So the non-dualistic fundamental Hindu assertion, two are dead, the true self of human, is identical with Brahman, so you said. It springs from the realization of this identity in the heart of mystical consciousness of Hinduism, meaning that the personal self is absorbed in the divine. Reflecting on the ongoing violence against women and children in India, what are the reasons for this Atman, Brahman identification failing? Is it about the strong influence of Maya and the caste system you refer to? What
Yes.
is your... Yes.
It's the caste system, and it's the belief, the deeply, deeply imprinted belief that women are inferior to men. It's absolutely deep in the Indian soul. Not the women's soul, I may say, but the men's soul. It's
So
very, very deep. It's a patriarchal legacy, and I don't know how it can be overcome, because the police in India are not trained to look into all the crimes against women and to bring to justice the men who have inflicted either rape or murder on them. It's a very, very big problem. It's a huge problem for India, because there's a lack of balance between men and women, and a lack of balance in the whole culture. And there's a cruelty there which comes to the fore in the treatment of women.
But also you talked about karma, which we all know about, and they believe in that. So how can they be so criminal and violent towards children, not just to women?
Because this is the unconsciousness. This is all of our unconsciousness. They may have the most marvelous philosophy in the world, but they are unable to live by it. The great mass of the people, and the governments are unable to live by it.
But I was hoping...
No government in the world is living by the highest principles. So.
Sure, that's why we are where we are. But I was really hoping to tap into your great knowledge and wisdom of the Jungian thought, that from that point of view, that how would you actually see these behaviors of Indians, this violent behavior?
Well, it's a deep belief that women are inferior and really need to be subject to men, and it's so deeply ingrained. I don't know how you can get it out of the psyche. It's there in the Indian psyche, particularly in the people who persecute the Dalits or the untouchables, because I'm not sure that they even have access to education, the untouchables. There's a huge social program that needs to be undertaken in India, which actually there are many organizations like the Brahma Kumaris organization and other ones who are helping women and children in these situations. But they're like a drop in the ocean, because the Indian population is enormous.
Yeah. And one can experience the same in Nepal. I remember a couple of years ago, I was in Kathmandu. I visited a Hindu charity school, and the director was explaining to me that he rescues constantly women and children. They were left by their husbands, and they have no skills, they have no expertise, and they can't really live. So he welcomes those women, and he teaches the teachers. They teach skills to them so they can actually earn some money. So it is not just India, but it's clearly some kind of I don't know. Yeah,
it's a patriarchal hangover.
The dark side of Hinduism.
The dark side of Hinduism, definitely, but it's also the dark side of other cultures as well. Look at Africa. Look at South Africa. Terrible culture. Anyway, should we move on to if there are any other questions?
Absolutely. Well, let's see that we have 19 people. Paolo.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you again. Wonderful lecture. Thanks so much. I think a question I have is around the word Atman. It's a very dear word to me. I even incorporated a company under that name. And what I like of that concept is the idea of there's Atma and Atman. Atma meaning the individual soul, and Atman meaning the universal soul. And the concept that in our lifetime journey, it's a progression from being an individual soul, so kind of separated from the universal soul, to that universal state where all is one. And we are then connected with Brahman. So I wonder whether you could elaborate a bit more around the Atman concept and the implications in our life journey.
Well, the Atman is really the divine element within our soul. Mm-hmm. It's not the soul itself, it's the divine element within the soul and within the body as well. And Brahman, as I said, is really the universal principle. It's a name given to the divine ground. And our task is really, as I said, to first of all be aware that we have a divine element within us, the Atman within us, Secondly, to be aware that that Atman is always part of Brahman, never sort of differentiated in any way, but needs to be able to articulate itself in our lives by expressing itself in some form of creative activity that doesn't harm others, some form of caring or loving or compassionate or creative action that doesn't harm others, because that would be the divinity in action, so to speak. When I come to Christianity, I've got a wonderful quote, which I won't mention now, but it will sum up that difference between bringing forth this divinity and not bringing it forth, where it can turn bad, so to speak. If you don't bring it forth, it can turn against you and lead to all sorts of troubles. Mm-hmm. Or can it be expressed in cruelties and monstrosities that we see all around us in the world today? Because that creative energy can be expressed either in a creative way or a destructive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Particularly that I think it's a gospel, right? That quotation you're sharing.
It's the Gospel of Thomas.
Yeah, it's Gospel of Thomas. So that if you don't bring forth what you have inside, it can be destructive, but it also can be destructive to yourself.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah. Thanks for making the connection.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paolo.
Thank you.
Now we have Michelle Blair. Hello, Michelle.
She needs to unmute herself.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
Hello, Anne. Hello, Georgie. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. I'm still trying to understand how, with the internet and our available information, how that the caste system is still in such a rigid place. And I wonder, are the people or the women aware of this, the impact on them?
They just are blind, suffering people who have no choice, no way out of their lives. Particularly widows. That's another thing. Widows are just abandoned. Nobody cares for them.
Do you find that maybe they can't see it, or because of the lack of information, or because there is no way they can change, so they stay almost in a state of denial? Or
much depends on what I said, that Indian government has not been good. It has not had enlightened government, and it still has at the moment, has no enlightened government. So it will not deal with these huge problems which it ought to deal with. And it isn't giving the help to women that it should be giving through the police, etc. And not giving them the education to all children, because there's not enough money, because it spends too much on nuclear weapons. You know, it's a vicious circle of degradation and ignorance and just sheer blind stupidity, really.
It seems that they have wisdom, but not necessarily, or there hasn't been integration of that wisdom into the culture because of the caste system.
Because of the Aryan input 2,000 years ago, which brought this caste system with them. It didn't exist before that. And it's very, very deeply embedded. Nobody dares to move from one caste to another. You can't marry outside a caste. Very, very rigid.
That definitely challenges my Western mind. So it gives me a great appreciation. I have much to be appreciative for today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Michelle. Now we have a comment from Amy Blumenshine in the chat box, which I will read out to you. I wonder about rejecting the mother as an explanation for dismissing of the female. One theory holds that as males grow through childhood, they come to reject their mothers as a way of demonstrating their maturity. In quotation, I am big now, all that feminine mother stuff is beneath me. What do you think on this? What's your take on this, Anne?
Well, one could talk for hours about the reasons for this that goes back so far into the past. It could be that men are different from women and resent the fact that they're not, that they've come out of women that they haven't got the ability to produce children like women have. It could be a deep envy. That's one theory. It could be that they want to cast off the influence of the mother, because Indian women are very powerful and very controlling to their boys and their men. But then when they break free of that, then men are very controlling of the wives that they marry and the way they treat them. So you could discuss this. It's a very interesting question. There's a man who's been writing to me about it, and neither of us can reach the bottom of why this should be so, why men have to throw off the influence of women. Usually it means that when a man matures, he finds a partner, a female partner, who then he's able to relate to on an equal level, or hopefully on an equal level, and each enjoys the input of the other into the relationship. And then they're mothers on both sides and fathers. So there should be a nice family unit. But as we know, quite often there isn't. Quite often there's trouble between the generations and trouble even among the parents. So that there are many, many complex situations. And this is what the Hindu philosophy meant by samsara. You get caught in the net of these illusory ways of behaving, which have nothing to do with the true way of behaving, or the awake way of behaving, if you like. Come to that next week with the Buddha. But we're sort of stuck in these patterns, and people react unconsciously because they've always reacted in this particular way, or because their fathers or mothers reacted that way. They copy the patterns, and they copy the social patterns because they don't know anything else. They don't know anything other than the caste system. They haven't lived in another society.
Mm-hmm. That's why probably so many of them, they go elsewhere. Like, I know that's a different one, but maybe similar example, that how Japanese, for example, when I was there, I spoke with so many of them, and said they want to actually get out of Japan and South Korea, so not to be raised and lived by those standards. They're so rigid and prohibitive. So they go abroad to either to the States or to Europe, where actually a more liberal system is
yes, and they find a different way of relating between the agendas and things like that, which is very good, very healthy. All this immense amount of traveling that we've seen, which has now stopped dead because of the virus, but it's fascinating that so many people are moving all around the world all the time.
Mm-hmm. And also, just segueing back to what you were saying about that, how the male child learns from the mother and treats the wife differently. It's almost like we can relate to trauma, isn't it? So the child experiences a trauma and then kind of like plays it out on the wife, and then kind of like that's what the children see. So it's kind of like it's an ongoing thing. So if they don't practice karma properly, then clearly there will be no change. But we do know that everything is a change. So what we do see is that more and more women are voicing their suffering and their resistance in India. Right?
I've just got a book written by Christina Lamb, who's a very well-known journalist, on the rape of women all over the world. And it is just horrific. And it's wonderful that she's written this book, but this is something that has not been addressed by any culture, including our own in England, because it's just too unpleasant, really. People don't want to think about it or talk about it. But women are beginning to talk about it. And I think this book will really raise a lot of questions and a lot of demands to have change of behavior on the part of military men, mainly. Mainly the military that has been doing the rapes, as it were. Anyway, there's another thing, because men copy the pattern of the way their fathers treat the mothers. That's another thing. If they hear the father shouting at the mother or saying shut up or whatever, they will copy that with their own children and teach their own sons to behave in that way too, to their own wives. So it goes on generation after generation. But we're all here to wake up. We're here to develop our consciousness. And this is a great time for waking up and becoming aware of all these things, I think.
Yeah, well, let's hope that there will be some effect tangible in India as well in this regard about treating women and children fairly and decently. There is another message from Vivian. Actually, Vivian, you posted like 2 or 3. Would you mind actually come and talk to us about it? I hope you would say yes. Otherwise, I'm going to have to read out your messages.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Vivian, hello.
I just washed my hair, so my hair's wet. But anyway, I don't care. So this idea of our sexual behavior is something that our interacting with nature and becoming more aligned with nature, I think, is something that I've really started to hone in on. It's something that's needed. So it just seems that there's a schism in our collective or individual psyche about, just being able to integrate our sex into, that we're sexual beings. So I'd like to, hear about, what that is as far as the topic of we've been talking about with Ann Baron, discussing that. So it just seems like there's just this. I just wrote a paper on dominionism in the United States and how there's, this whole thing that women have to be dominated, and there's a, it's at the highest level. It's Mike Pence won't even sit down to a meal with another woman without another man being there, and it's just crazy to me.
Well, this is all social custom that's very deeply embedded, but it's all getting loosened up. It's rather like a sort of earthquake that is breaking up the cement or the concrete blocks, and green shoots are coming up between the concrete blocks, and it's developing and changing now. And also for men, it's very important for men to respect their feminine side of their feelings, the feminine side of their nature, their intuitions, to trust them and act on them when necessary, because a great deal of male negative action comes from the repression of emotions in childhood and repression of feelings in the way that they were treated perhaps by their fathers or by their mothers. So there's many, many ramifications to this whole problem or situation. I mean, as I say, we could go on talking about it forever.
But what I had posted is that a colleague that came to Madonna Rising, Paula Sellers, has a program called Darkness to Light, and she's teaching it and giving it out for free. She got grants, quite a few grants to be able to do that. And I think it's going to be on the Ubiquity platform, if I'm not mistaken. But it's to help with sexual abuse in children is what the initiative is. Darkness to Light is a docu-training series. It's a 2-hour. It's not very long, and the Indian government has actually purchased it from her to come and make it more Eastern style rather than Western style. So she's in the process of doing that now. So that's good, right? It's the Indian government that's actually hired her, and it's through the United Nations, and she got awards through the United Nations. I posted it all. I just went to her LinkedIn and cut and pasted it, basically. But
it sounds good.
So, yeah, 4 million people have been trained in it so far.
It probably will grow very well.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling us about it anyway.
Thank you, Vivian. Now we have points made by Margot, one of our PhD students. She said the following 2 points. The caste system at its origin was mutable. It is with emergence of Manusmriti that it became inflexible and imposed on the people. The caste system as it is practiced today is an aberration. Number 2, there is an ancient tradition of 64 yoginis. Awareness is raising, especially in urban areas where modernization and unfortunately westernization is taking over. Women do have a role and also submit to the patriarchal society. It is complex. Where she lives in India, I know. So,
well, I have a friend in India who's been sending me what's happening to the women there. And she lives in South India, but she's absolutely appalled at the lives of women there.
Mm-hmm. It's quite interesting that today's discussion about Hinduism, we're really talking about that these these gender inequalities, and also that this is what you're going to talk about in the 5th session, that how these 4 traditions have implications and how they're really integrated in our lives today. So just wanted to really have an observation that the last 20 minutes or so, this is what we've been talking about, because the beautiful quotations from the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, so we shouldn't, I don't want to negate those, because they really are absolutely soul soothing. However, we want to, I think that the way our discussion turned out as it is because we are interested at how Hinduism is lived and practiced today.
That's right. But I think maybe it's just the way it's always been, that there have been a few 100 or 1,000 rishis or guides or gurus who have taught the people. But the great mass of the people, owing to the tremendous poverty and also the huge numbers, haven't had the opportunity to really reflect on all this. But it's deep in their soul, that the sacredness of the country and the rivers and the mountains and everything, that's very deep within them. And one hopes that the Western influence won't kill that out. That's another problem.
Sure.
Because it could destroy the very deep, deep reverence that the Indian people have for nature.
Thank you, Anne. Well, we're almost at the bottom of the hour. Thank you very much for your wonderful lecture. And thank you for Paolo, Michelle, Vivian, Amy, and Margot for your contributions. So see you next week, same time.
Buddhism.
Place. And we'll talk about, talk about Buddhism. All the best to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.